My neighbors are acting suspicious, and their children aren't aging. I was 4 years old when the Ambrosio family moved in next door. There was the mother, Valentina, the father, Paul, their 8-year-old daughter, Ria, and their 5-year-old son, Billy. Valentina was tall, slender, golden blonde, and sociable, all sweetness and light and small talk. Paul was dark-haired, burly, taciturn, always tailing his wife like a shadow. Billy was scrawny, clumsy, often sick, and prone to saying the weirdest things. But it was Ria that caught my attention. Even skinnier and sicklier than her brother, she'd inherited her father's quiet nature, always vanishing into the background so she could read, and that was on the days when she was healthy enough to be out of bed. Like her mother, she was golden blonde and blue-eyed. Unlike her mother, Ria's left eye had a distinctive flaw, a single metallic gold spot just below the pupil. As far as I can remember, my parents liked the Ambrosios, and I had something of a crush on Ria, but looking back, we didn't know much about them at all. They moved away just before I turned 5. I didn't think there was anything strange about it. It was a tumultuous time in our neighborhood, with people renting houses and moving out just as quickly once the rent got too high. When I was 10, my parents decided to move as well. Unfortunately, just as I was getting excited about the idea, bureaucracy hit us hard. It seemed like every time we were ready to start packing, there was another form to fill in, and so my parents were left trapped indoors with their paperwork, while I roamed the neighborhood, all of us bored out of our skulls. And then, a week after we should have left, the Ambrosios moved back in next door. Ria and Billy were the first to arrive that day, clambering out of their car and marching up the driveway as if they'd never left, and immediately I knew something was wrong. Neither of them had aged. Ria was still 8, Billy was still 5. It had been years since I'd last seen them, but even I could remember that they'd been bigger than me at the time. Now I'd somehow outgrown them. And no sooner had I recovered from the shock, Valentina stepped out of the driver's seat, every bit as vital as she'd been 5 years ago, without lines on her face or the slightest trace of gray in her hair. Then she saw me peering over the fence. Instantly, her smiling face dropped into a stunned gape. Then her mouth twisted into a scowl, and she looked at me with such venom in her pale blue eyes that I instinctively ducked out of sight, suddenly convinced beyond all rationality that she'd hurt me. When I finally worked up the nerve to peek out again, she'd gone indoors, taking Paul and Billy with her. Ria was still standing there, eyes wide with an emotion I'd never seen from her: hope. Then Valentina stormed out onto the driveway, grabbed Ria by the arm, and dragged her indoors, hissing furiously at her as they vanished into the depths of the house. A moment later, I heard the faint but unmistakable sound of Ria screaming in pain. I didn't tell my parents about what I'd seen. I wanted to, but something about that look of bilious hatred in Valentina's eyes filled me with such dread that I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. By the time I went indoors, I'd given myself a million different excuses to avoid telling them about it, even briefly convincing myself that the two kids weren't Ria and Billy at all, but their cousins. Any excuse would do if it meant I wouldn't have to face Valentina again. But I couldn't forget or ignore the way she'd grabbed Ria or the scream I'd heard after she'd been hauled indoors. So, despite my fear, I kept an eye on the Ambrosio house, trying to find a moment when I could talk to one of the kids without their parents noticing, or Valentina appearing at the door to offer me a cup of cocoa. One day, Valentina took Paul and Billy on a shopping trip, so I took the opportunity to sneak over, hoping to speak to the only member of the family left behind. In the end, I didn't get anywhere until I crept around the side of the house and found Ria waiting for me at the back door. Immediately, I saw the gold flaw on her left eye, and any remaining doubts melted away.
This was the real Rhea Ambrosio in the flesh, somehow still 8 years old. More unusually, her eyes were unfocused, her pupils wildly dilated. Her hands were trembling as she opened the door for me, and her forehead was glistening with sweat. At the time, I thought she was just sick, but now I know she was sedated to keep her under control. It must have been taking every atom of her strength to just stay on her feet. And as I let her in, I saw that her right hand had been heavily bandaged, completely obscuring her fingers. No sooner was I indoors, she lost her balance, falling hard on her left leg and leaving a huge bloody scrape across her knee. But just as I was helping her up and looking around for a Band-Aid, I saw the entire wound seal shut, leaving behind nothing but bare skin and a faint blood stain on her shorts. Once I'd recovered from the shock, I naturally wanted to ask questions, but before I could even start, Rhea put a hand over my mouth and hissed, "Shh!" She then drew a notepad and pencil from her pocket, and on the top page clumsily scrawled out, "Can't tell you. The house is bugged. She's listening." She paused, hope dawning in her unfocused eyes, and then wrote, "Easier to show you." I let her lead me into the study, where a large box of photo albums sat, ready to be unpacked and locked in a filing cabinet. Selecting the topmost album, she opened it for me. Inside were a series of antique photographs, many of them dating back to the late 19th century. And they didn't feature grandparents or great-grandparents, but Valentina Ambrosio herself, just as glamorous as she was in the present. About the only thing different about her were the black robes embroidered with occult symbols that she wore in the oldest photographs. No matter how far back the album went, Valentina never aged. She remained outwardly 30, as vital as ever. The same couldn't be said for everyone else. Before long, the most common of the photos was Valentina at funerals, mourning the death of another loved one, and looking a little more dispirited with each shot. But then her spirits reignited with a series of romantic photographs, climaxing with her wedding to Paul in 1935. Cast the enchantment on him the morning after, Valentina's handwritten caption read, "Now we'll be together forever." And then there was Rhea's first baby photo, dated 1937. Paul had even gone to the expense of using color film just to capture that distinctive gold flaw in her eye. At this, I looked up at Rhea with a questioning look. I wasn't great at math those days, but even I knew that she should be around 60 at the very least. Rhea understood at once and nodded. And to this day, I can still remember just how tired she seemed in that moment. Billy was born in 1940. Judging by the next few photographs, Rhea and Billy had enjoyed a very happy childhood. Trips to the beach, lavish Christmas parties, tree houses too elaborate to be built by normal parents, Halloween parties with impossibly realistic disguises, and even a few shots of Rhea studying a huge leather-bound book, captioned, "My Little Sorceress." But picture by picture, Valentina's mood began to change again. As Rhea turned 9 and Billy turned 6, her mother's expression soured with discontent, and every smile she wore from then on seemed a little more disappointed as the two grew older, until at last there was a photo of Rhea leaving for college, while next to her a teary-eyed Valentina barely grimaced. The next few pages of the album were snapshots of Rhea and Billy's adult successes, sent back home to Valentina, torn up in a rage, then hastily taped back together again. This came to an end in 1962 with a beautifully handwritten letter, sealed and preserved in plastic. "Dear Rhea, I've considered your request, and I now realize that I was wrong to speak so harshly to you. You have every right to pursue your own dreams, and I will be more than happy to teach you the secret magics, even if doing so means that you'll leave the country to pursue your research. Please come home to us, enjoy your last family dinner, and I will give you everything you need. Your loving mother." The album ended with 2 photos, likely taken by Paul. The first was a shot of an adult Rhea, tall, graceful, confident, and dressed to impress. Valentina stood behind her, her hand faintly glowing, her face twisted into a hideous smirk. The second was a shot of Rhea, suddenly 8 years old again, her now gigantic adult clothes draped over her like a tent, her mouth open in a scream of horror. And in the background, Valentina laughed triumphantly. "This family won't be broken," blared the caption. "We'll be together forever now." Billy wasn't given the same formality. He was kidnapped on the way back to his college dorm, according to Rhea's notes, then tied to a chair before being enchanted and regressed. And this time around, the entire transformation was captured in no less than 30 snapshots. The next few albums were a chronicle of Valentina forcing her two immortal children to live out their second childhoods as she wanted them to. Again, there were Christmas parties, tree houses, books, and trips to the beach, but the joy was gone, as were the friends who'd once been invited. Worst of all were the photos of Billy looking progressively more spaced out, accompanied by the caption of "Finally found the right drug. Now he acts his age. Pity there's no drug that can induce docility and preserve that bookish streak, or Rhea would be perfect." But it wasn't until Rhea decided to show me the nursery where she and Billy slept that I finally realized just how nightmarish things had gotten for them, because that was where most of the punishments for being too grown up were enacted. After all, the only reason why Rhea had been able to escape this room and let me into the house was because Paul had drugged her instead of restraining her, not realizing that he'd gotten the dosage wrong. Outwardly, the Ambrosio nursery was just as bright and cheery as you'd expect for the children's room, but the door was clustered with locks and chains. There were handcuffs fastened to the bed frames, plastic sheeting on the mattresses. The top of the tall boy was clustered with pill bottles, glass vials, and syringes, and hanging from the ceiling was a curious-looking nursery mobile. Where most mobiles would have had farm animals, fish, birds, or stars, dangling from the strings of this baby mobile were 5 curiously fleshy shapes on fishhooks. I didn't realize what they were until I saw the fingernails. Heart hammering, I looked down at the bandages around Rhea's hand. By way of reply, she held up a note that made my blood run cold. "Fingers take longer to grow back." Rhea wanted freedom. She explained as much in her notes and begged me for help. She told me she just needed me to sneak into the house after everyone was asleep and copy a few pages of her mother's grimoire, just enough to control her own age and force Valentina into a compromise. Once Rhea and Billy were chained down and sedated for the night, Valentina was in the habit of leaving the grimoire out of its safe in the study, especially if she'd had a few glasses of wine during her nightly research. If Rhea left the bathroom window unlocked for me, it'd be easy for me to sneak in, so she said. In the end, I agreed to help, mostly out of pity, but also because Rhea told me my life was in danger. After all, Valentina regularly faked IDs and moved her family so nobody would notice their immortality. My parents had screwed that up by delaying their departure from the old neighborhood, leaving me as a witness, and Valentina had left quite a few inconvenient witnesses in shallow graves over the years. In hindsight, I'm glad I never accepted any of the drinks she'd offered me earlier. So, that night, once my parents had drifted off to sleep, I slipped out of bed, armed myself with a disposable camera, snuck out through the back door, and crept over to the Ambrosio house. The bathroom window had been left unlocked, as promised, and after years of climbing trees and shimmying up walls in my spare time, it didn't take too much effort to scramble over the sill and into the house. I still remember the deathly silence in the halls as I tiptoed to the study, of how the shadows seemed to bend and ooze around me, of how I froze at every pause in the muffled snoring from the master bedroom, of how I tried with all my might not to think of exactly how Valentina would kill me if I got caught. Somehow, I made it to the study without being noticed, and sure enough, Valentina's grimoire was there, on the desk, exactly as she'd left it. As soon as I was sure that nobody was awake to hear, and the door was shut behind me, I turned on the desk light, leafed through the book until I found the pages that Ria was looking for, and photographed each one with the disposable camera. Once I'd finished photographing everything Ria had asked for, I flicked off the light and crept out of the house, and right on time, too. Paul had just gotten up for a glass of milk, and if I'd left a moment earlier, he'd have seen me leaving the study, and because I was there just in time to catch a glimpse of him heading to the kitchen, I could see he was ready in case Ria or Billy ever escaped from the nursery. He was armed with a cattle prod. The next day, I got the photos developed. It cost me most of my pocket money, but I was just glad nobody at the shop asked questions about the content. Then, while Ria and Billy were playing outside and Valentina was distracted inside, I slid the photos through a hole in the fence for Ria to pocket. It was a momentous occasion because it was the first time in 5 years I'd seen her smile. She even broke her silence long enough to whisper, "I won't forget this, Tom. I owe you more than you can possibly imagine." I don't know how she managed to hide the photographs long enough to learn from them, but I was expecting the results to be impressive. I was thinking that the confrontation between Ria and Valentina would be a magical duel right out of Hollywood, to the point that I spent the next few days waiting for a glimpse of the fireworks. But in hindsight, I now know that Ria wasn't going to confront her mother about anything. After all, the last time she'd given Valentina the benefit of the doubt, she'd de-aged her back to childhood while her back was turned. Why risk giving her a chance to strike first? So I awoke one morning to find the house next door eerily silent. After spending nearly an hour watching for any sign of activity, I crept over to closer look. The front door had been left hanging open, the filing cabinets and the safe had been emptied, Valentina's wardrobe had been raided, and the car was gone from the driveway. Of the Ambrosios, no sign. After that, my family and I moved out of the neighborhood and settled in Vermont, and my life returned to normal. Years went by. I did well in high school, went to college, got a job, began winning promotions, and eventually I got a small house of my own at a dirt cheap price. No family, though. My encounter with the Ambrosios permanently soured any notions of marrying and having children. And then, last month, I got new neighbors. I saw them that Saturday morning trundling to a stop in the driveway of the house next door and piling out of their van, a family with no less than 12 impressively diverse children, ranging from age 14 to 3 months old. Also, for some reason, 5 of them were dressed as pirates, complete with eye patches. The mother and sole parent looked uncannily familiar. Tall, dark-haired, confident, perhaps 30 years old and heavily pregnant. Just looking at her reminded me of photos from the 1960s for reasons I couldn't explain. But it wasn't until she walked up to say hello that I finally realized why she seemed so familiar. Ria winked at me. "I told you I owed you more than you can possibly imagine." Then she walked off to shepherd her children indoors, pausing only to beckon me to follow. And so I did, watching in awestruck silence as my old childhood crush went about settling her family into their new house with the kind of speed that only magic can manage. She'd learned a lot in the years since I'd last seen her, I realized, as the house's internal dimensions warped and expanded around us. But shocked as I was, it didn't take me too long to get suspicious about Ria's children. After all, the way they jumped to attention whenever they spoke and flinched whenever she raised her voice was concerning enough, as was the curiously mesmerized look to their adoring gazes whenever they huddled around her. and when I saw that the eldest child was a dead ringer for Billy Ambrosio at 14, I knew there could be only one explanation. I sighed. "You said you just wanted to be free," she admitted. "But in the meantime, I had to keep Mom and Dad under control, help Billy recover, and try to make a life for myself. It was easier to keep them young and weak, and after a few years of failing to make it in the legitimate world, I realized that I'd missed out on so many opportunities, so much history I could have thrived in." Ria offered a sad little smile. In the end, I realized that after everything I'd been through at Mother's hands, what I wanted more than anything else in the world was power, to take back what I'd lost with interest. Magic gave me power, true, but being a parent gave me so much more than that. There's no drug in the world as pure and rapturous as the fear and love of a child for her mother. She giggled, actually giggled. Now I know why so many cult leaders have their followers call them father. I swallowed hard. "But where did all these children come from?" I asked, nervously. "Who were they?" "Oh, drunks, addicts, petty criminals. Nobody who'll be missed. Well, maybe one or two cops who came to investigate the disappearances and one nosy little imp from Child Protective Services, but it doesn't matter. I'm a better sorceress than Mother ever was, and for someone of my talents, laws and violence are of no concern. Besides," she added, "it's not as if anyone can kill me, is it?" "And you're just gonna keep adding to the family? You're just gonna keep making random people immortal and de-aging them into children just for the sake of feeling powerful and loved?" "Why not? With my powers, I can feed, house, clothe, and entertain hundreds of them without paying a cent, maybe even thousands. And if I don't, well, they can't die either, so—" That impish giggle again. Ria paused and glanced at one of the younger children. "Paul," she called, pushing a cooler towards him, "could you put this up in the nursery?" The kid who had once been Ria's father took the cooler with some difficulty. Like quite a few of the kids, he was dressed as a pirate, and something behind his eye patch seemed to be hurting him. He kept scratching and worrying at it. It wasn't until he shuffled into the nursery and opened the cooler that I realized why. Inside was a baby-mobile, but thankfully this one didn't have fingers hanging from it. Unfortunately, it was looking back at me. 5 newly extracted eyeballs hung from the mobile by the optic nerves, taken from 5 kids now dressed up as pirates. I was at my limit by then and ready to make a run for it, but there was one other mystery that needed clearing up. "Where's Valentina?" I asked, almost dreading the answer. "That's the beauty of magic," Ria mused airily. "Once the subject's immortal, I can control their age in any way I please." "Where is she?" Ria didn't answer. She just smirked and gently stroked her swollen belly, delighting in the faint kicks from within. And that was my cue to leave. I'd heard enough, and frankly, I didn't want to hear Ria's explanation. I didn't even want to imagine it, if only because my first visit to the Ambrosio house had left me with more than enough nightmares already. Paul reached out for me as I left, clutching pathetically at my jacket. Once upon a time, he'd been a hulking giant of a man, the terror of Ria, Billy, and even me. Now he was 6 years old and tiny for his age. "Kill me," he whimpered. "Kill me." I muttered a half-hearted apology and pulled away, running for the door without looking back. I wouldn't have known how to help him, even if I'd wanted to. Wish my confession could have ended there. But 2 days ago, I was gardening, trying to distract myself from my new neighbors, when I fumbled the pruning shears and accidentally sliced my left arm open. And before my eyes, the wound healed in a matter of seconds. I don't know when Ria cast the spell of immortality on me, but that's the only thing that could explain it. She said she owed me for freeing her. Did she repay her debt by making me immortal and leaving me to my freedom? Or is her idea of a reward a place in her family, preserved in eternal childhood, and any minute I'll shrink back down to 10 years old? I don't know, and I'm not sticking around to find out. I don't need to worry about outliving relatives, forging IDs, what I'll have to do to stay sane, or even if Rhea will follow me. I just need to get the hell out of here before the worst transpires. All I leave behind is this confession of the role I played in unleashing a monster on the world, and a warning to avoid her at all costs if you see her. Hopefully the description will be enough to save you. If not, well, there's always room for another child in the family.